Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil has made a decision that may define his time in office. He's stopping Northern Pulp from dumping waste into the Northumberland Strait. The issue boiled down to a choice between jobs in the economy and the environment. The waste from the mill has been going into the waters of a nearby First Nation.
The Boat Harbour Act will be enforced as of January 31st, 2020. Northern Pulp will be ordered to stop pumping effluent into Boat Harbour. And let me be clear, there will be no extension.
The CBC's Brett Ruskin is in Halifax with more on the Premier's decision.
It was pretty simple, actually. Even though it was a difficult decision, the rationale is fairly straightforward. Premier Stephen McNeil said what was acceptable in 1960 when this pulp and paper plant began pumping effluent into this First Nation is no longer acceptable in 2019 and 2020. That was the case in 2015 when this law took effect, the Boat Harbour Act, which basically said there's a 5-year stopwatch that starts now. And as of January 31st, 2020, this mill can no longer pump effluent into the First Nation. That clock has been ticking, and there was hope by the workers at the very least that there could be some kind of an extension to allow the mill to continue pumping into this spot while other plans were put into place. But that's not the case. The mill will be closing. Here once again is Premier Stephen McNeil talking about perhaps some support that he could offer to these workers.
To those workers and their families, please don't despair. Our government will help and support you in this transition. Effectively today, we are announcing a $50 million transition fund. This will support displaced workers, small contractors, and all those whose livelihoods will be affected.
And if we're talking about numbers now in terms of these workers, 300 or so workers at the mill itself, but another 2,700 workers who provide wood to the mill in the forestry sector. All of those jobs are now effectively eliminated when this mill does close. So thousands of Nova Scotians will be without work. They're hearing about it just days before Christmas. John.
Well, as you can imagine, Brett, reaction was swift. What are we hearing?
Well, we're hearing, as we just heard from a news conference that happened in this room just a short time ago, we had a response from both the CEO of the company as well as the Unifor, the union representative, and they had to say basically instead of, it was a blame game essentially. The province is blaming the company is blaming the province for this decision, saying that they are surprised by this decision, that it's going to devastate the forestry industry in Nova Scotia with this significant loss of employment. Here is that union representative talking about what this means and what this support transition system now means for these workers.
That transfer monies is basically going to be buying a bus ticket for the employees at the mill to move to another province, because guess what? Obviously, the Premier doesn't respect those employees or anything to do with rural Nova Scotia, because he just decimated rural Nova Scotia.
And so that again is the response from the union representative representing these workers. One more aspect of this response we heard, because we have reporters down at Pictou Landing First Nation, the First Nation that has for decades seen this pulp mill dump effluent into their environment, devastating the environment and killing fish in that lagoon that they had once used for leisure and for fishing. It has been decades now that they have been waiting for this announcement. There was cheers and applause when the Premier Stephen McNeil made this announcement, and so just broad response from all different sectors to this huge announcement, this controversial decision, this difficult decision by the Nova Scotia government today. John.
The CBC's Brett Ruskin.